Richard Mille is losing everything, and nobody is talking about it. 11.5 grams. The weight of a folded business card. 2 sheets of printer paper. And also, the weight of the most important watch Richard Mille ever built. And when that watch stopped being worn in competition, something bigger than a partnership ended. Let me show you. The weight of a business card. Mallorca, Spain, early 2008. A man flies in to meet a 21-year-old tennis player who had won 4 French Opens and wanted nothing on his wrist during matches. Richard Mille, the founder, shows up with 2 prototypes. The first is platinum, heavy, dense, the kind of calling card a serious watchmaker presents when he wants to be taken seriously. Nadal picks it up, makes a face, sets it down. Mille hands him the second. Nadal holds it for a moment, turns it over, can barely feel it. They spend 2 years making it ready for competition, and in 2010, at Roland Garros, Rafael Nadal walks onto the clay with an RM027 tourbillon on his left wrist. The watch weighs 20 grams, including the strap. It costs $245,000. It is also, at that moment, the lightest tourbillon ever built. He wins. He keeps winning, for 14 years. The RM027 becomes the RM27-01, then the 27-02, the 27-03, the 27-04, each one lighter. Each one more resistant to the forces Nadal generates at match pace. Forces that, at the tip of his racket during a serve, exceed 1,200 Gs. To put that number somewhere useful, a fighter jet pilot pulling hard into a turn experiences 9 Gs. A highway car crash delivers roughly 100. Nadal's serve hits 1,200 at the point of contact, every match, for years, and the watch kept running. Then came the final chapter, the RM27-05 flying tourbillon, unveiled in May 2024. Richard Mille called it the climactic conclusion of the RM27 saga. The case machined from a single block of carbon TPT B.4, a new composite, denser and stiffer than anything the brand had used before. The movement mounted directly into the case, without a single screw, held in place by the bezel pressing down from above. 11.5 grams, excluding the strap. Resistant to 14,000 Gs. 2 world records for a manual winding tourbillon, 80 pieces, $1.15 million each. The project had started in 2019, 4,000 hours of engineering work. Then Nadal wore the watch at the 2024 French Open, lost in the first round, and 5 months later retired in Malaga. The partnership that started with a joke in Mallorca, a platinum watch that weighed like a brick, presented just to watch Nadal's reaction, ended with a loss on clay and a retirement speech. So that is the proof. Not a marketing claim, not a brand story someone wrote in a press release. A live test, broadcast to hundreds of millions of people, running continuously for 14 years, across the most watched tennis tournaments on Earth. You could not fake it. You could not manufacture it. Either the watch worked on Nadal's wrist through 22 Grand Slam titles, or it didn't. It did. And that proof was worth more than any advertisement Richard Mille ever ran. Because it answered the only question that matters when you are asking someone to spend $200,000 on something that weighs less than a coin. Why does this justify the price? The answer was on his wrist every time he walked onto a court. Picture the person who first heard about this brand somewhere in the mid-2010s, not a watch collector, not someone who knew the difference between a flying tourbillon and a standard one. Someone who had simply heard that this watch costs $200,000. And the reason you might believe that is reasonable is that Nadal wins Grand Slams in 1. That person did not need to understand movement architecture to accept the price. They needed 1 sentence, 1 proof, 1 man on 1 court. Nadal recalled years later, "I still remember the day in 2008 when Richard contacted me. It was unthinkable for me, as I had never worn anything on my wrist." It all came together in 2010, when he came to visit me in Mallorca. As a joke, he first presented me with a very heavy platinum watch. When I reacted as you might expect, he quickly held up a prototype of the RM027, a surprisingly light watch with spectacular lines. That story is perfect, because it is true. And true stories are the only ones that hold a $200,000 price for 14 years. October 2024, Malaga, the story ended. Which of the Nadal watches do you think held its value best on the secondary market? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious what the community thinks. The partnership built the brand's case for 14 years. Now, I want to show you exactly what that proof was doing underneath the surface and why losing it matters in ways that don't appear in the revenue figures. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part, what proof actually does. Here's something worth understanding about how luxury brands justify their prices. Most of them point inward, at heritage, at history, at the archive. We have been doing this since 1839. Our watchmakers have trained for 30 years to chamfer a movement bridge to a standard most people cannot see without magnification. The proof is in the past, and it is invisible to anyone who has not spent years learning to see it. Richard Mille pointed outward, at a living human being, in real-time competition, on a court with cameras on him and 200 million people watching. The consequence of that choice is not obvious until you think about it carefully. When your proof lives in an archive, losing a craftsman or discontinuing a reference changes nothing fundamental. Patek Philippe's history does not expire when a watchmaker retires. The tradition is the proof, and tradition compounds over time. You can spend decades pointing at what your predecessors built and charging for the accumulated weight of that pointing. But when your proof is a person, it retires when they do. I keep coming back to this, because it sounds too simple to be the real problem. And then I think about what the Nadal partnership actually did, and I realize it is exactly that simple. Someone hears about Richard Mille for the first time. They know nothing about tourbillons. They have no idea what carbon TPT is. They do know who Nadal is. And someone tells them, this watch is on his wrist during every Grand Slam he wins. That sentence closes the gap between, why does this cost $200,000 and, okay, I understand. The proof is immediate, universal, and does not require any specialized knowledge to work. Take that away and what remains? The carbon TPT is still real. The manufacturing tolerances are still extraordinary. The movement architecture is still unlike anything Patek or Rolex produces. The case construction on the RM27-05 is a feat of engineering that 4,000 hours of work barely begins to describe. None of that changed when Nadal retired. But the living demonstration ended. The tests stopped running. And the brand's next generation are tasked with answering a question that was never part of the brand's founding calculation. What do you do when the proof walks away? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a strategic one with a deadline. Because luxury mythologies do not stay in place on their own. They require maintenance, either a new demonstration or a transition to heritage. And heritage is something Richard Mille, founded in 2001, does not have yet in any meaningful depth. The brand is 25 years old, half the age of a Patek Philippe reference, a quarter of the age of Vacheron Constantine's founding. You cannot fall back on a centuries-long story when your story is that short. So either you find a new proof, or you spend the next decade watching the mythology slowly become nostalgia. There is also a financial dimension to this that nobody discusses when they talk about the Nadal partnership ending. The watches built for him, the RM27 series, are among the most liquid Richard Milles on the secondary market. The RM035 Nadal in carbon TPT, which retailed for $85,000 when it launched in 2011, trades above $200,000 today. The celebrity-linked, competition-proven references sit in a completely different resale tier from standard production pieces. Dealers who buy and sell Richard Milles every month describe a market that splits sharply between pieces with a direct line to athletic proof and pieces without that line. When you remove the ongoing generation of those proofs, the secondary market tiers do not collapse, but they stop growing toward each other. The ceiling on what a competition-proven reference can command is set, in part, by the sense that the proof is still live, that the brand still does this, that the partnership is still running tests. Now it isn't. They've already started answering the question of what comes next, But the answer raises its own questions, and some of them are ones the brand can't fully control. The next chapter, and what it costs. In February 2026, Richard Mille unveiled the RM41-01 Tourbillon Soccer, 5 years in development. A patented flyback chronograph caliber with 2 entirely new complications: a match phase indicator and a mechanical goal counter that tracks every score from kickoff to final whistle. The case in grade 5 titanium. Price: 1.45 million Swiss francs. Developed in collaboration with Audemars Piguet Le Local. It is, by any honest assessment, a serious piece of engineering. And it is also a watch you wear to watch football, not a watch that survives playing it. That distinction matters more than it sounds. The RM27 series worked because Nadal was in the sport, at its absolute limit, and the watch had to survive alongside him. The RM41-01 tracks a match from the viewing position. It is a mechanical scoreboard, brilliant in its own right, but inhabiting a completely different relationship to athletic performance. One is a tool worn by the person performing, the other is an instrument worn by the person observing. Both are watches, only one generates proof. Women's watches now account for more than a third of global Richard Mille revenue. Commercial director Alexandra Mille confirmed this publicly in a June 2026 interview, framing it as a structural shift and a primary growth engine. The RMHJ02, unveiled earlier this year, is a high jewelry collection. 12 unique pieces, 1,399 precious and ornamental stones per watch. 3 years of gem-setting work, an entirely new in-house tourbillon developed specifically for the collection. The South China Morning Post described the high jewelry direction as a defining force in contemporary watchmaking for the brand. Alexandra Mille called it a structural, architectural, and commercial pillar. It is technically extraordinary. It is also the furthest thing imaginable from a 20-gram watch surviving a serve at Roland Garros. There is a collector who has been buying Richard Mille watches since 2009. He owns 4 of them now. He told a dealer earlier this year that the last 2 purchases felt different from the first 2, not in the quality of the pieces, which he acknowledged was equal or better, but in the feeling of buying them. The first 2, he said, felt like investing in something that was still proving itself. The last 2 felt like buying into something that had already been proven, somewhere else, a few years ago. He still bought them. But the feeling was different. That distinction is hard to quantify, but it maps onto something real in how the brand is functioning right now. Now here is where fairness requires a pause. Expansion is not dilution. Brands grow. They find new customers, new categories, new reasons for people to spend money with them. The revenue numbers are real, and they are strong. Approximately 5,950 pieces in 2025. Approximately 1.75 billion Swiss francs. For a brand that did not exist in 2000, that number is almost difficult to process. But there is a specific thing that made those numbers possible, and it was not just the watches. It was the story underneath the watches. The story that said, this is what performance engineering looks like when there is no budget constraint and no regard for convention. That story was true because Nadal kept winning in the watch, season after season, and every win added another line of evidence to the case. The brand is now growing fastest in categories that tell a different version of that story. Not what does engineering look like at the edge of competition, but what does engineering look like when applied to gem setting and women's design? That is a legitimate answer to a legitimate question. It is not the same question. And somewhere in the shift from one question to the other, the original proof gets lighter. Not gone, not discredited, just lighter, less present, less alive. Here is the observation that sits at the center of this. The brand's founding myth was built on the idea that the watches earn their right to exist, that they are not expensive because of what they signal, but because of what they survive. That is a specific and rare kind of luxury proposition, one that does not need you to already believe in the brand to work. You can come in cold, skeptical, knowing nothing about watchmaking, and a single sentence about Nadal makes the price comprehensible. The new categories do not have that sentence. They require you to already be inside the brand's world to understand why the price is what it is. That is not weakness. It is how most luxury brands operate. But it is a different operating mode. And the transition between operating modes is the period when a brand is most vulnerable to the question it was built to answer. Why does this justify the price? There's something else happening simultaneously, something outside the brand's control entirely, that is cutting at the mythology from a direction none of the founding decisions could have anticipated. The watch that makes you a target. In April 2022, Viareggio, Italy, two people in motorcycle helmets approach Charles Leclerc for a photo and an autograph. He obliges. Seconds later, they are on a scooter, his $320,000 RM 67-0, two gone with them. Leclerc chases them in his Ferrari. The footage circulates widely. The watch is eventually recovered. 4 people go to prison, 2 of them for 10 years and 8 months each. In September 2023, outside the Armani Hotel in Milan, the night after the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Carlos Sainz is accosted at knife point. 3 men take his Richard Mille, worth approximately $500,000. He gives chase through Milan on foot, still in his racing boots from the event earlier that day. He gets it back. He posts on social media. The most important thing is that we are all okay, and this will only remain as an unpleasant anecdote. In October 2025, a parking garage off Main Street in Irvine, California, an Orange County businessman walks toward his car after work. 3 men are waiting. 2 draw guns. They passed a $300,000 vehicle parked nearby without any interest. "My car was running. They could have taken the car. They just came for the watch," he said afterward. He believes a photo on his private Instagram account, posted a few days earlier, was the tip that brought them there. He was pistol-whipped repeatedly. The guns jammed. He told NBC Los Angeles he does not know why he is still alive. These are not isolated incidents. In 2024, according to the Watch Register, all 10 of the most expensive watches stolen globally were Richard Mille models, averaging approximately $3.2 million per piece. In 2025, more than 10,000 luxury watches were reported stolen worldwide, nearly 1 per hour. Richard Mille sat at the top of the most targeted list by value per theft. At the 2025 Formula One weekend in Austin, Texas, court documents describe a coordinated operation. A woman would pretend to fall near wealthy individuals wearing expensive watches. When victims bent to help, her accomplices removed the watches from their wrists. 2 Richard Milles taken that way at Circuit of the Americas in a single weekend. In May 2025, former NFL defensive end Jason Pierre-Paul had his stolen at the Miami Grand Prix. Leclerc, Sainz, Norris, twice, once outside Wembley at Euro 2020 and once in Marbella. The Beverly Hills restaurant in 2021, where a woman was shot during a robbery targeting an RM 11-03. Paris organized crime task forces dedicating specific resources to watch thefts in the 8th arrondissement. The organized gang in Beverly Hills, identified as members of the Rollin 30s Crips, charged with conspiracy to interfere with commerce by robbery for the Il Pastaio incident alone. Think carefully about what has happened here. Richard Mille built a watch that communicates wealth immediately and unmistakably to anyone in any setting. That was the design. The asymmetric case, the skeletonized dial, the size, the visual language, all of it was built to be read at a glance by anyone, regardless of any watchmaking knowledge. It works because it requires no decoding. The room understands without being told. It worked. The signal is universal. But that universal signal is now being read by organized criminal networks as precisely as it is being read by collectors and aspirational buyers. The watch designed to say, "I belong in certain rooms," is also saying something else. I am carrying something worth more than most cars. It fits in a jacket pocket. And it is the most portable store of value you will find on a human body at a hotel bar or an F1 paddock. The brand designed the signal. The brand cannot control who reads it. And here is the specific way this damages the mythology. Richard Mille's founding story was about invincibility, the watch that could survive anything. The engineering designed to function under conditions that destroyed everything else. That story is true in its original context. The Nadal serve, the F1 cockpit vibration, the sprinting and the golf swing. The movement survives those things, the engineering works. But a watch that makes the wearer feel like a target is not an invincible object, it is a liability. And the brand's most visible wearers are now part of a growing list of people who have been violently robbed, specifically because of what was on their wrist. That is a story about the watch that the brand cannot tell its way out of. The Leclerc robbery happened in Tuscany. The Signs robbery happened outside the Armani Hotel in Milan the night of the Italian Grand Prix. These are not random street crimes. They are targeted operations by organized groups who understand the brand's visual language at least as well as the collectors who buy it. So, the watch built to communicate invincibility has become the watch that requires a risk calculation in Milan, in Paris, in Beverly Hills, at an F1 event, outside your own office building. Not an aesthetic decision, a safety decision. And some buyers who can absolutely afford a Richard Mille are quietly choosing something less legible, not publicly, not as a statement. Just when they decide what to put on before leaving the house, none of this surfaces in the revenue data. It shows up as a slow, unmeasurable shift in what the ownership experience feels like from the inside, and what the brand means to the people who would otherwise be its most visible ambassadors in exactly the rooms where the signal is supposed to matter most. The watch that was supposed to make you feel like the most capable person in any room now also makes you the most visible target in it. Those two things cannot comfortably coexist in the same brand story for long. There is a specific cruelty in the timing here. The brand lost its competition proof when Nadal retired in October 2024. It is simultaneously running the highest theft risk profile in the luxury watch market, which changes how some of its most natural wearers think about putting the watch on. Two separate pressures, from two separate directions, arriving in the same window. Put everything together, and the real question comes into focus. Not whether Richard Mille is losing everything. The numbers say clearly, it isn't. But whether it can build the next proof before the first one fades past the point where mythology can carry the weight alone. What the mythology was, and what comes next. Richard Mille's mythology had one shape. The watch earns its right to exist through performance. If you wanted to know why a piece of carbon fiber and titanium weighing less than a coin justified a price that puts it among the most expensive things you can strap to your wrist, the answer was, watch Nadal play tennis in it. That answer is past tense now, and nobody at the brand is saying that out loud yet. The brand is not in trouble. 1.75 billion Swiss francs in annual revenue, fewer than 6,000 pieces per year. A 45,000 square meter manufacture opened in Les Brûleux in 2021, not the infrastructure of a company expecting difficulty. The next generation running it is coherent and motivated. Alexandre Mille's public comments in 2026 describe a structured vision: 8 to 12 new creations annually, continued investment in research and development, expansion of in-house movement production toward full vertical integration. So, the brand is fine. But the mythology is under pressure from three directions simultaneously, and pressure from three directions at once is different from pressure from one. Direction 1, the proof retired. The Nadal partnership did something for this brand that no current partnership replicates. Leclerc is talented and visible. The soccer watch is technically serious. The high jewelry push is commercially rational. None of them give someone encountering the brand for the first time a single sentence that explains why the price exists. The Nadal proof was one sentence. He wins Grand Slams in it. What is the current sentence? Direction 2. Wearing the watch has become a calculation in ways it was not 5 years ago. Not for every buyer, not in every city, not every day, but for enough of them in enough places that the association is shifting. The watch that said, "I operate in certain rooms," is also, in certain contexts, saying something the brand would rather it did not. That is not manageable by redesigning the case or changing the visual language. The signal is the product. You cannot make the signal less legible without making the product something different. Direction 3. The brand's fastest growing categories answer a different question than the one the brand was founded to answer. High jewelry, women's pieces, sport-themed complications for observers of events rather than participants in them. These are not mistakes. They are intelligent responses to where new revenue and new buyers exist. But they slowly move the brand's center of gravity away from the place where its original case was made. Every successful brand eventually navigates this transition, from proof to mythology, from here is a demonstration to here is the legacy of a demonstration. Patek Philippe made it decades ago. Rolex made it. The brands that navigate it without losing the thing that made them matter are the ones that build a second proof before the first one finishes expiring. They find a new way to answer the founding question, not as nostalgia, not as archive, but as a living test with something at stake. Richard Mille does not have that new answer yet, not one that works the way Nadal worked. The soccer watch requires you to already understand what the brand is. The high jewelry collection requires you to already believe in the price. The F1 partnerships are compelling, but they do not produce the kind of footage that ends arguments. A man winning a Grand Slam in something that costs more than most people's houses, over and over, for 14 years. The brand has time. The mythology does not evaporate overnight, but it is moving, from something earned in real time on a clay court to something preserved in press releases and secondary market data. And once a mythology becomes something you explain rather than something you watch happen, the price starts needing a different kind of justification. There is a version of this story with a good ending already written. Richard Mille finds a new partnership in the next 2 or 3 years with an athlete or a discipline that creates the same kind of ongoing public test that Nadal created. Not a watch worn at photo shoots, a watch worn during something that matters, where failure would be visible, where winning while wearing it would be undeniable. That version is available. The engineering capability is there. The commercial intelligence running the brand is there. The question is whether the opportunity presents itself in time and whether they recognize it when it does. What that partnership looks like is the real unknown. Tennis produced Nadal because Nadal was a specific kind of person in a specific kind of situation. A left-handed player whose wrist action during a forehand generated forces at the point of contact that made extreme engineering a genuine requirement, and whose dominance at one venue, Roland Garros, for a decade and a half, gave the story a home. You knew where to go every June to watch the proof be confirmed again. Formula One is the obvious candidate for what comes next, and Leclerc is the obvious name. He wears Richard Mille. He is one of the most recognized faces in the sport, and the brand's connection to motorsport runs back to its founding philosophy. But Formula One drivers wear watches in cockpits that seal around their wrists, and the extreme conditions experienced in a race car, while real, are not the same kind of extreme as Nadal's serve. The story is harder to tell in a single sentence. He wins Grand Prix. In it has some of the same shape, but not quite the same force. The next proof might not come from sport at all. It might come from an environment nobody has connected to fine watchmaking yet. An extreme environment that creates a visible, repeated, public test. Something that makes the price feel inevitable rather than optional. Or it might be that Nadal was simply unrepeatable. A specific person in a specific sport at a specific level of dominance, willing to wear the watch during actual competition for long enough that the proof accumulated weight. Not every 14-year window produces a Nadal. Not every brand gets to build its mythology on one. What do you think the next proof looks like? Drop it in the comments. Seriously, I want to know whether people watching this see an obvious answer the brand is missing, or whether that chapter is closed. The brands that outlast their founders and their partnerships are not the ones that protect what worked. They are the ones that build the next version of what worked before anyone notices the first version is gone. Richard Mille earned its price for 14 years on a court in Paris, on a Tuesday afternoon in June, in the 5th set, with clay dust still rising. That was real. That earned every dollar of it. And it is not coming back. The next proof is somewhere. The question is whether they find it before the mythology gets heavy enough to carry the price alone. Because mythology is a wonderful thing to have, but it is not the same thing as proof. And this brand was built on knowing the difference. If your sense of what a brand actually sells has sharpened past the surface, there is a guide in the pinned comment that breaks down how to evaluate a watch on its own terms. What separates a movement worth understanding from one worth owning, and where the real value hides in a market built on signals. 2 minutes. Worth it. Like this video if the Nadal question stayed with you. Subscribe if you want the next one.